3:12 p.m. Dismissal hour at Elmridge Elementary School, a modest campus tucked beneath a canopy of fading red maples in the quiet northern suburbs of Chicago. The late autumn breeze whispered through the white picket fence that lined the edge of the schoolyard, rustling the leaves that had long since fallen and lay still beneath the trees, like end-of-day secrets too soft to speak aloud. The school bell rang, not too sharp, not hurried, as if urgency had never been part of Elmridge's vocabulary. Classroom doors swung open one by one. Children burst forth like flocks of birds finally freed from their cages, some giggling with their desk mates, others waving wildly at a familiar face in the distance. Sneakers scraped across brick walkways, backpacks bumped and rustled against each other, and in between it all, the air filled with the sound of voices, young, bright, full of life. A line of minivans stretched along the main pickup lane. Mothers leaned out car windows, calling their children's names as if afraid their voices might get lost in this joyful, chaotic tide of freedom. A father in a business suit struggled with the lid of his coffee cup just as his daughter ran toward him, her smile lighting up the space between them like he hadn't seen it in a week. Everything at Elmridge, that Friday afternoon, felt so peaceful it made one believe nothing bad could ever happen here. A few teachers still lingered at classroom doors, offering gentle farewells. On the stone steps outside the front lobby, a gray and black German shepherd lay resting. Old fur softened by time, head nestled between his front paws, eyes half shut. His name was Titan, once a K-9 in the county's Special Response Unit, now retired, and the quiet heartbeat of the school's therapy initiative known as Silent Companion, a joint program between the school and local law enforcement. Seated beside Titan was Officer Deanna Rodriguez, her hair neatly tied back, uniform jacket draped loosely over her shoulders. She was scribbling notes on a student file, occasionally lifting her eyes to scan the courtyard with quiet attentiveness. Above them, the American flag swayed gently in the wind. It was a late autumn Friday, calm, predictable, familiar. And none of them knew that in just a few short minutes, this place, this haven of steady footsteps and after-school routines, would be torn open by a growl. Not thunder, not wind, but something deeper, an instinct that had never failed, a growl that would shatter the peace Elmridge thought it had locked safely away. In the far corner of the stone steps, where the sunlight had already slipped past the edge of the lawn, Maya Summers sat curled up on a pale purple backpack. A little fox with glasses was printed on the front pocket, slightly faded from use. Unlike the other children still chasing one another with half-finished yogurt drinks or crumpled scribbles clutched in their hands, Maya was still. Not sad, just quiet. She was 8 years old, with dark brown hair trimmed at the shoulders, braided simply on both sides. Her eyes were large and deep, the color of damp tree bark after rain, carrying a quiet thoughtfulness rare for someone her age. When people looked at Maya, they often said she looked like her mother. But it wasn't just the resemblance in her features. It was the way she sat, hands folded gently in her lap, watching rather than moving. The way she breathed slowly, eyes scanning the far end of the road as if measuring the pulse of the town beyond. Every Friday afternoon, Maya's mother, a physician on rotation at the community clinic near 47th Street, arrived later than most. But Maya never complained. This was her red car counting hour, a game of her own invention. Each time a red car passed the school gate, she would count silently in her mind. The 15th car was usually the one that came just before her mother did. And on days when it arrived too early, Maya would simply wait a few more minutes to be sure. Titan, the old German shepherd, was her quiet companion in those waiting moments. Maya rarely spoke to him. Sometimes she would just reach out and let a single finger brush against the stiff curve of his ear. Titan never stirred. But if you watched closely, you might notice a subtle flicker in his eyes, as if to say, "I'm here." That day, Maya had counted 10 red cars. The wind was gentler than usual, and sunlight poured directly onto the bench where she sat. A few rays bounced off the zipper of her backpack, making her squint. She shielded her eyes, but didn't look away from the street ahead. Not because she expected the next car, but because something wasn't right. Someone was approaching, a figure moving closer from the far sidewalk, casting a long shadow across the bricks. It wasn't a shape Maya recognized, not any of the parents she'd seen before. And in that brief, breathless moment, Titan, still as stone beneath the autumn sun, slowly turned his head. The man emerged from the far end of the sidewalk, where bare trees cast long, skeletal shadows across the moss-speckled concrete. He wore a charcoal wool coat, the collar turned up just enough to shield the edge of the shirt beneath. His steps were slow, but not weary, each footfall measured, deliberate, as if the path had been rehearsed down to the last crack in the pavement. His face held a calm expression, almost friendly. Salt and pepper hair combed neatly, metal-rimmed glasses resting squarely on the bridge of his nose. A presence that invited no suspicion, nothing threatening, but nothing warm. Titan remained where he was, but his head had risen just slightly above its usual resting height. One ear tilted toward the approaching footsteps. Maya spotted him from a distance. She didn't smile, didn't wave. Her brow knit together, subtle but unmistakable. There was something in the man's gaze, not affectionate, but not entirely unfamiliar either. It was the way someone might look when trying to recall something they once knew, while the person being looked at remembers nothing at all. He stopped just a few steps away. And then he smiled. "Maya," he said, voice deep and smooth, with a hesitation that wasn't quite fear, more like careful calculation. "Sweetheart, I'm here to pick you up." Maya stood, but she didn't move toward him. Her small hand clutched the strap of her backpack. Her brown eyes remained fixed, watching. But now something flickered in them. A soft gleam, like someone flipping on a flashlight to test the darkness. "You are?" she asked quietly. The man smiled again and bent slightly at the waist, softening his voice into something meant to sound safe. Familiar. "I'm your grandfather, sweetheart. Your mom asked me to come get you today. She's tied up at the clinic, couldn't call." Still that same gentle tone adults often used with children. But Maya didn't budge. Her gaze flicked to Titan, then back to the man. The doubt in her eyes was now clearly visible. One of the nearby teachers glanced over, perhaps sensing something off, perhaps intending to approach. But before she could take a step, the man spoke again. "Miss Emily knows me. It's okay, come on." But Emily, the only teacher still by the second-grade hallway, was crouched down, tying a student's shoelace. She didn't look up. No confirmation. No denial. Titan, until that moment, had made no sound. But from the second the man had said the words, "Your grandfather," the dog's gaze had locked. And when the man took one more step forward, slowly, almost casually, and reached into his coat pocket to retrieve a plastic ID badge, it happened. A shift. Subtle, but absolute. As if the quiet rhythm of a peaceful afternoon had been pushed ever so slightly off its axis. The soft rustle of fabric as the man withdrew the ID card from his coat pocket was barely audible. It was nearly swallowed by the laughter of children and the distant honk of cars idling beyond the school gate. But to Titan, That sound sliced through the air like a blade. No one gave a signal. No one spoke a word. Titan moved. Not with sluggish hesitation. Not with the measured calm he had come to embody. He rose in a single motion, a full-body reflex triggered by something ancient, buried deep within the spinal code of an old command set. His frame locked, chest lifted, paws planted firmly on the cold stone steps. Then came the sound, low, stretched, rumbling from his chest in a vibration so deep it felt like the earth itself was cracking. Diana Rodriguez froze mid-sentence, pen lifted slightly above the page. Her eyes lifted, brow creased. It had been a long time since Titan growled. Even during therapy sessions with students in distress, he had never responded like this. He was the definition of calm. Never alarm. "Titan," she said softly, voice calm but alert. Her right hand hovered at his collar. "What is it, buddy?" Titan didn't turn. He didn't need to. His eyes were fixed, drilling into the man standing just feet from Maya, locked in with a cold stillness that felt almost inhuman. His spine arched slightly. The fur along his shoulders bristled and trembled. The growl changed, now no longer one long thread, but broken into short, deliberate pulses. Each one struck like a coded message. The man hesitated. He lifted a hand in a gesture of peace, forcing a smile, but it cracked at the edges. Unease had begun to bleed into the lines at the corners of his eyes. "Oh, I guess the dog doesn't remember me," he said with a stiff chuckle. "I'm family. Maya's family." Diana stood slowly. She didn't need to hear any more. Titan's instincts, forged in nearly a decade of service alongside the Special Response Unit, had never been wrong. If Titan growled, something was off. It didn't need evidence. It didn't need explanation. It needed to be trusted. Nearby, a few parents began to notice. One mother gently pulled her daughter closer to her side. A teacher turned off her walkie-talkie and stepped forward, her eyes narrowing in on the scene. Titan did not move from his stance. Still as carved stone, he growled again. A firm, deliberate sound, as if knocking on the fragile glass that held the peace of the afternoon in place. And then, he stepped forward. Deanna's grip on his collar tightened. Her voice dropped lower, sharper. "Stay, Titan." But Titan did not stay, and in that fading autumn light, something crossed an invisible threshold. A line had been drawn. This was no longer just another after-school hour. It had become something else, a growl, not born from fear, but from duty, from protection. No one spoke, but something in the air had shifted. The rhythm of the afternoon, once soft and steady, had veered off course. A teacher froze mid-step in the courtyard, her gaze darting from Titan to the man. A child, dashing past with a crinkled snack bag, suddenly slowed, the bag slipping from his fingers. Titan's growl, though not loud, seemed to pull the space tighter, like an invisible dome descending upon the crowd. The silence grew so deep that even the whispering wind in the trees now sounded like a voice. The man took a breath, shallow and quiet. He lowered the ID in his hand, as if trying to anchor himself. But up close, there was no escaping Titan's stare. The dog's mouth remained slightly parted, the growl still reverberating from his chest in a steady, unrelenting rhythm. His eyes didn't blink. They didn't need to. "Maya," the man said again, softer now, the voice of someone reaching back into a memory they hoped still existed. "Sweetheart, don't be afraid. It's me. I'm just here to take you home, like always." Maya didn't move. But something had changed in her face, a flicker of clarity, that quiet spark people wear when they're about to say something that matters. She studied him for a moment longer, then took half a step back. "You're not my grandpa." Her voice was barely louder than a whisper, yet it sliced through the scene like a blade through still water. Murmurs rippled through the cluster of parents. One mother instinctively pulled her child a step behind her. A school security guard began moving slowly toward the gate. No one could say exactly what was wrong, not yet. But they knew Titan wasn't mistaken. And now the little girl was saying it too. Maya took a breath, lips trembling. Then, as if retrieving a fragile memory only she could reach, she spoke again, louder this time, more certain. "My grandpa, he smells like cinnamon and soap." Another breath. Her eyes stayed locked on the man. "You smell like wet wood and metal." The man froze. The smile on his face cracked, just slightly, but enough to show through. It wasn't the kind of answer anyone had expected. But it was the only one that mattered. And with that one sentence, the world around them changed. A teacher reached for her walkie-talkie. The third-grade instructor stepped beside Maya and placed a firm hand on her shoulder. A parent silently pressed 911 on the screen of her phone. Deanna didn't ask another question. She turned to face the man fully, positioning herself between him and Maya. Her right hand rested at her belt, near the radio and the canister of pepper spray. She hadn't drawn them. Not yet. But Titan had already moved one step in front of her. This was no longer the calm of dismissal hour. This was something else. An alert. A call to instinct, the kind only children and battle-worn dogs could still carry in their bones without question. The man began to take a half-step back, ID still in hand, though now his fingers trembled. A subtle movement, barely visible, but just enough. Enough for Titan to ignite. In a blur of muscle and instinct, the German Shepherd launched forward, closing the remaining gap in a single explosive arc. Not to attack, but to shield. His body swung around in one fluid motion, placing himself squarely between Maya and the man like a living wall of flesh and fur. "Titan, back!" Deanna's voice rang out sharp, commanding, as she yanked hard on the leash. Titan hesitated, just for a heartbeat, but didn't retreat. A growl tore from his throat, higher now, more urgent. His eyes locked, frozen on the man. The man raised both hands in the air, his face stiffening, the edges of his practiced smile starting to fracture. "Easy. I'm just a relative." "Step back," Deanna warned, her voice no longer soft. She had already reached for her radio. "This is Officer Rodriguez at Elmridge Elementary. Code 41, requesting immediate backup at the front gate. Suspicious individual attempting contact with a minor. Holding position." Titan stood his ground, unmoving. His body was drawn tight like a bowstring, shoulders raised, tail rigid and trembling with stored tension. Around them, the adults had gone quiet, every breath suspended in the hush before impact. A teacher gently pulled Maya backward, one careful step at a time, like she was moving a precious gem. Maya didn't cry. She didn't ask questions. She simply gripped the teacher's hand and kept her eyes on Titan, eyes filled with a quiet, unshakable trust. The kind of trust children almost never give. Unless they know. I can explain," the man stammered, his voice thin, palms still raised. Maybe I can just make a phone call." "No." Deanna's answer was sharp, final. She had seen enough. She had seen Titan's reaction. She had seen the way Maya's face changed when the man stepped closer. These weren't behaviors covered in any textbook, but reality had taught her well. Dogs do not lie, and children, when they are scared enough to speak, do not lie either. In the distance, sirens began to rise, faint at first, then louder, clearer, cutting through the air like a tolling bell that signaled the end of something. Titan crouched lower, his gaze never breaking. Deanna stood beside him, shoulder to shoulder, both of them guarding something fragile, a boundary, a promise, a truth not yet spoken. It had started with a growl, and within minutes, the peace of a quiet school dismissal had shifted into the opening scene of an investigation no one had seen coming. The sound of the police cruiser wasn't loud like in the movies. It came in clipped pulses, just enough to sever the schoolyard's rhythm from its usual afternoon pace. Children stopped running. Parents turned their heads. A patrol vehicle from the Lake Forest County Sheriff's Office rolled up to the front gate like an old panther, one that didn't need to roar to be respected. Its mere presence was enough to make everything pause. 2 officers stepped out. Leading them was Sergeant Mark Decker, tall, broad-shouldered, voice low and concise. He'd responded to 3 school-related interventions in the past year, but never had he seen a K-9 take point before the police did. Deanna met them halfway, her posture sharp with command. Titan stayed at her side. He didn't bark, he didn't lunge, but his entire body was held in a tension so tight a thick vein was still visible pulsing beneath his fur. The low growl in his throat remained, soft but unmistakable. To anyone who knew what they were hearing, it meant one thing: not safe yet. The subject claims to be a relative. The child denied it. Dog reacted with high alert, requesting a full search of personal belongings, Deanna reported swiftly. The man, now visibly sweating at the hairline, raised his hands without resistance, trying hard to keep his voice even. "I told you. I'm just here to pick up my niece. Emma sent me. This is my backpack. You're welcome to check." Decker glanced at his partner, gave a subtle nod. The younger officer pulled on a pair of nylon gloves and reached for the brown leather bag placed near the bench, the same bench where the man had been sitting. The zipper moved slowly, each tooth parting with a quiet tick, but no one breathed while it opened. And then they saw it. A small glass jar with a screw cap, filled with an unlabeled clear liquid, a tightly wound coil of black plastic pull wire hidden beneath a folded button-down shirt. And in the front pouch, something that didn't belong. Something no one expected to find at an elementary school hundreds of miles from its home. A cloth doll. Worn, fraying at the ears, hand-stitched with a single name. Elena. Deanna's hand instinctively clenched at her belt. She knew that name. Elena Foster, 6 years old, missing from Denver for over 6 weeks. It was an open case, one with FBI involvement. She'd skimmed the reports, seen the photo once in a briefing, glanced at the internal memo that circulated. But now, the doll, Elena's doll, was here. In this place, on a school campus, in a different state. The air didn't just tense, it froze. "Call Agent Shaw's office directly," Deanna said quietly to Decker. "No dispatch. Encrypted line." Titan gave a single growl, low and short. But this time no one tried to stop him, because now they all knew. He was right. "Wait, you're blowing this way out of proportion." The man's voice broke the silence, lightly trembling, though he tried to keep it level. Every word sounded carefully chosen, measured just enough to avoid sounding panicked, just enough to appear like a man caught in the middle of a simple misunderstanding. Decker didn't answer. His eyes lingered on the worn fabric doll that read Elena, then gave a small nod. His partner moved into position. Deanna stepped forward half a pace, her eyes locked on the man. Titan remained low and steady, blocking the path between Maya, now safely inside the school office, and everything else that remained outside. The man exhaled sharply, as if trying to reclaim control of the room. He slipped his hand into his coat pocket, slowly, deliberately, a motion that felt practiced, like it had been rehearsed in front of a mirror. From the pocket, he pulled a dark leather wallet. He opened it carefully, almost theatrically, and drew out an Illinois driver's license, holding it up for them all to see. My name is Daniel Carter, born 1961. I'm the girl's grandfather. Emma, my daughter, asked me to pick her up because she's on an emergency shift today. Deanna took the ID. The moment her fingers touched the plastic, something felt off. Not the name, not the photo, but the texture, the thickness of the laminate, the two clean edges, the way the card gleamed beneath the light. Something about it felt manufactured. She said nothing. Instead, she glanced over her shoulder toward Decker. The older officer approached and lifted a handheld scanner from his belt. With a quiet buzz, he passed it across the ID. The screen blinked, then froze. No data. Decker scanned again. This time the screen displayed a stark line of text. No match, not in system. Could be a counterfeit photo or an unregistered ID number, he muttered, his voice low, the timbre of old wood under pressure. Then, more plainly, and heavier, or this came from the black market. The man attempted a smile, though it faltered at the corners. Crooked, stretched thin. Must be a system error. I just got this card replaced a few weeks ago. Maybe it hasn't updated yet. Deanna handed the ID back. Not because she believed him, but because they already had enough to escalate the situation beyond this level. Mr. Carter, she said evenly, please have a seat on that bench to your right. Keep your hands visible. Do not reach into any pockets or bags. If we need to speak further, we'll ask. The man complied. He lowered himself slowly, his shoulders sagging just a bit, but his eyes still searched the space with a forced calm. A performance, one he was losing grip of. Titan did not move. His gaze never wavered, and there was something deeper now in those eyes, not just watchfulness, but memory. A recording. Because liars use words, but dogs trained in the crucible of search and survival don't trust words. They trust scent, eyes, and the rhythm of a heartbeat. The brown leather backpack remained on the stone bench, zipper pulled wide open. The items retrieved from it were now laid out separately inside contamination-proof evidence bags, the glass vial, the coiled plastic wire, and the cloth doll stitched with the name Elena. Officers had taped off the area. The children were all safely escorted back into the school, and Maya, still tearless, was seated quietly in the nurse's room, a teacher staying beside her. She hadn't asked any more questions. She just kept glancing toward the window, looking for Titan. Titan hadn't moved from his post, but when Deanna and another officer approached the backpack again for a second round of inventory, the dog shifted. Not much, just enough for Decker to notice. "What's he reacting to?" Decker asked. Deanna didn't answer right away. She crouched beside Titan and unlatched the leash from his collar. Then, without a word, she raised her hand in a silent signal, one that only dogs trained for tactical response would understand. Titan moved forward. Slowly, deliberately. Each step was measured, his nose sweeping just above the concrete, neck lowered, tail still. When he was within a meter of the bag, he stopped. A low growl rumbled from his chest, quieter than before, but different. Not a threat. A warning. Deanna watched him closely. Titan leaned slightly towards the left side of the backpack. The leather there bulged ever so slightly, as if something rigid beneath was keeping it from lying flat. "All right, buddy," she whispered. She slipped on a pair of gloves. With careful fingers, she examined the side panel of the bag. It looked like it had already been checked. But at the bottom lining, where the fabric doubled, there was a narrow seam, hand-stitched, freshly done, invisible to anyone not trained to look. Titan sat back now, but his eyes didn't blink, still watching. Deanna took a slim blade and gently cut the thread. She reached into the fold, feeling something hard, flat, and sharp-edged beneath the fabric. She drew it out, a small object wrapped in clear plastic, a black USB drive. Unlabeled, unmarked, unencrypted on the outside. The mood shifted instantly. Decker stepped closer. "You sure you didn't check that part?" "I'm sure. He stitched it by hand, hidden well enough for an amateur search to miss it." Titan let out a soft hiss of breath, almost a sigh. Then he turned his head and looked directly at the man still sitting on the far bench, hands folded, eyes pretending to be empty. That stare, cold, unwavering, unblinking, was not a question. Titan wasn't waiting for answers, because he already knew. The small USB drive rested in the center of Deanna's palm, weightless, yet impossibly heavy. No one said it out loud, but everyone felt it. This wasn't for saving PowerPoint slides or family photos. It had been hidden, stitched shut like contraband. Decker tightened the strap over his sidearm, but didn't move. Beside him, his partner retrieved a special evidence bag lined with electromagnetic shielding and carefully sealed the device inside. Deanna's eyes never left it. Could be encrypted, or laced with malware, or holding something he couldn't say out loud. She stopped guessing. Instead, she pressed the button on her radio. "This is Rodriguez, requesting immediate transfer of electronic evidence to assigned FBI agent. Priority gold tag. Possible link to the Denver missing child case, 6 weeks prior." From the patrol car, a new presence arrived, sharp, swift. Agent Monroe, federal liaison, mid-30s, black leather jacket, anti-static gloves already on. She moved quickly beneath the temporary caution tape and took the bag with both hands. "Encryption? Behavior anomalies?" she asked, her tone clipped, no space wasted. Deanna nodded, then pointed toward Titan, now sitting like a statue under the shade of a maple tree. Still, watchful. "K9 alert, no scanner trigger." He caught the stitched lining at the bottom of the bag. Monroe glanced at the dog, then back at Deanna. Her eyes shifted. Slightly, no longer processing a report, now acknowledging something more, something off the record. "I'll run it through our data lab. Expect initial findings within 12 hours. "No need to wait for a report," Deanna said quietly. "I saw the girl's eyes when she recognized that doll, and I saw Titan's when he scented the bag." Her voice didn't waver. "What's inside that drive isn't a coincidence." Monroe didn't smile, but her face changed, ever so subtly, tightened into a quiet pause. The kind of expression agents make when instinct begins to speak louder than procedure. "I'll treat it as a special case escalation." Deanna nodded once. But inside, she already knew. This was no longer just her story. From Titan's first growl to a worn doll stitched with the name Elena, a door had opened. Not one anyone had planned for, but one that could no longer be closed. And whatever lay on the other side was already leaking the scent of danger, the kind only an old dog could catch. From silence. The stainless steel handcuffs clicked shut behind the man's back, a cold final sound, like the locking of a story no one had yet fully understood. He didn't resist. Just let out a long breath, lips pressed tight, as if he finally accepted that words would not carry him any further. "What's your name?" Decker asked one last time as he opened the patrol car door. "Daniel Carter," the man answered, eyes unblinking, but no one standing there believed him anymore. Titan remained under the old maple, unmoving. He didn't need Deanna's signal now. The wind passed gently through the branches above, casting shifting shadows across his back, as if even the sky was holding still for him, giving this moment its own silence. The car door opened with a soft electronic chime. The man walked forward at the officer's instruction, each step heavy, deliberate, but only one gaze followed him all the way. Titan's. No growl, no bark, Just that stare. Long, quiet, unflinching. Those eyes, the same ones that had seen drugs hidden beneath seat cushions, traffickers disguised as uncles, blood dried beneath coats of white paint, now watched in stillness, not in forgiveness, just knowing. The man turned his head once, almost involuntarily, perhaps pulled by instinct, or something older than fear. He looked at Titan, and in that 1 second their eyes met. If he had been someone else, if he had been capable, maybe the look would have been a question. Maybe he would have said, "How did you know?" But Titan didn't answer. Dogs like him don't explain. They just know. The door shut with a final clunk. The patrol car's shadow slid past the school gates and disappeared down the road, leaving behind a schoolyard quieter than usual. Not because the school day had ended, but because something else had happened here, something that nearly slipped through. And it was an old dog who stopped it. Deanna sat down beside him, hand resting gently on his back. She didn't speak loudly. "You're never wrong, are you?" Titan didn't answer, just blinked once for the first time since the warning began. FBI Chicago Field Office, 3rd floor. The Special Data Processing Room was a place where fluorescent lights never turned off, and the soft hum of computer fans became part of the air. At 2:43 a.m., while most of the city slept under the hush of post-rain silence, a young technician in a gray hoodie leaned forward, eyes locked on his screen. The glow of the monitor reflected in his pupils as lines of decrypted code scrolled past, each one like a thread unraveling a darker story. The USB drive recovered by Titan showed no folders at first. It appeared blank, clean. But 3 layers of encryption fell away one by one, revealing a root directory labeled Pavilion A1. Inside were subfolders, each too neat to belong to anything accidental. Profiles, images, ratings, schedule. The technician stared at the folder names like he was staring into a well. A deep one. Not the kind you fall into, but the kind that shows you what's looking back. They called Agent Helen Shaw, the lead investigator on cybercrimes and federal-level child abduction cases. As she entered the room, she didn't bother to remove her coat. She moved straight to the monitor. "How many files?" she asked. "We're still counting," the technician said quietly. "But it looks like more than 60 girls. Photos, behavioral notes, internal scoring sheets, some tagged as ready, some as evaluate, and some marked sent." Shaw sat down slowly, her jaw set. Images began appearing one by one on the screen. None were posed, none were staged, just frames of ordinary children caught in unguarded moments, after school, on playgrounds, standing near curbs. Girls between the ages of 6 and 9. Alone. Each file was labeled with a coded name and a short profile. Candidate 17, A. Quiet. Unresponsive to strangers. Success rate, 92%. Observed for 3 days. No school resource officer assigned to her campus. Shaw's voice dropped to a whisper, more to herself than anyone else. "This isn't a list of victims. It's a checklist. For transport." Deanna Rodriguez stood by the door, arms folded tightly. She hadn't said a word until now. When she stepped forward, she didn't look at the screen. Her eyes were fixed on the USB drive inside its evidence bag, sitting at the edge of the desk. "We didn't catch him because he slipped," she said. "We caught him because Titan doesn't know how to ignore the smell of danger." Shaw didn't respond, but the shift in her expression said enough. What they were looking at wasn't a fluke or a one-time case. It was the edge of something organized, something built to operate in the shadows. The names on the list weren't names anyone had spoken out loud. But they were all real, all waiting, all marked. And now, thanks to a quiet girl, an old dog, and a growl that broke the silence, They were no longer invisible. There was no file labeled Victor Hayes on the USB, no email address, no signature, not a single line that pointed directly to him, except for one small detail, nearly invisible to the average eye. Inside the /schedule directory, buried among dozens of meaningless numbered text files, there was one file named VH Protocol 11B. The tech team initially assumed it was a placeholder, but when Agent Shaw opened the file, its contents revealed something far more deliberate: a detailed instruction sheet outlining timelines for engagement, identity impersonation techniques, target classification protocols, communication strategies with partners, and finally, a section titled Procedure in Case of Target Resistance. At the bottom of the document, 2 letters repeated: VH. Shaw didn't need more than that. She had heard the name before. Victor Hayes, a ghost that had briefly surfaced in FBWAR internal records back in 2011, after the disappearance of 3 children in Oregon. No evidence, no conviction, only a string of weak links. And then the name vanished. "Call Special Archives," she ordered. "I want everything on Victor Hayes, including records that no longer exist in administrative databases." 30 minutes later, an agent from the National Intelligence Division arrived carrying a printed report. It wasn't marked confidential. No department logo, just a stack of faded yellow pages, as if the government itself wanted to forget it ever existed. Victor Hayes's file hadn't been lost. It had been deliberately removed. Born 1964. No clear employment. Documented ties to 4 front organizations across 3 states. Once investigated following a disappearance in Albuquerque, but charges were dropped due to insufficient evidence. A blurry sketch appeared among the pages, too vague to identify. But Deanna focused on one thing: the eyes. The cold stare, void of emotion. It matched the man at the Elmridge school gate, the one who called himself Daniel Carter. If that was him, Deanna said quietly, then Titan's growl wasn't just instinct, it was a warning against a system designed to hide in plain sight. Shaw nodded slowly. He didn't vanish, he was duplicated, and now he's not working alone. Victor Hayes, a name never convicted. But in the shadows of encrypted USB folders, he was the one writing the rules. Inside the /profiles directory, there was a file named ELN_046F.transfer. No full name, no profile photo. Just a series of cold identifiers: age, height estimate, hair color, duration of observation, and at the end, one final note: status, transferred. But within the /images folder, buried under a subdirectory labeled /candidate A, there was a photo: Elena6yodal.jpg. The image was blurry, taken from a distance, through a glass window, under dim lighting. A little girl sat on a porch, holding a cloth doll with one ear frayed, the very same doll that had been found in the man's bag that day at Elmridge. Shaw enlarged the image and cross-referenced it with the missing child report for Elena Foster. 6 years old. Disappeared from her front yard in Denver 6 weeks ago. Every detail matched, from the uneven crop of her bangs, cut at home by her mother, to the blue bracelet on her wrist, handmade by her older brother. "No doubt," Shaw said softly. "That's her." Deanna stood behind her. She didn't sit. She didn't need to. "So that means she was transferred." The words sounded like a term from a logistics report, but in reality it was a sentence, delivered without trial, without appeal. Elena, the child whose face had been printed on milk cartons, who had sparked citywide search campaigns, who inspired Denver's own Bring Her Home movement, had now been reduced to a single line of text. Transferred. No destination, no recipient, no health status. Just a word, like a line drawn through her existence. Shaw stared at the monitor for a moment, then spoke, her voice low but firm. "She's still out there, and we don't have the right to be late." Deanna didn't respond. But under the desk, Titan blinked. His head rested on his front paws, unmoving. No one had taught him the word Elena. But he had known the scent on the doll. And that scent had not faded. The room stayed silent. Not with helplessness, but with focus. Because the names that aren't spoken don't mean they're gone. They're just waiting for someone quiet enough to hear. The temporary operations room on the 5th floor of the FBI's Chicago field office had no formal signage. On the door, a single sheet of A4 paper was taped with brown packing tape. Scrawled across it in black marker were 2 words, War Room. No one was joking when they called it that. For the past 18 hours, it had become the nerve center for every bit of data extracted from the tiny USB Titan had sniffed out from the brown leather bag. Deanna stood at the front of the room, in front of a large whiteboard, holding a paper cup of cold coffee. Her eyes followed the images flashing across the projection screen. Satellite maps of elementary schools throughout the Midwest, time-stamped data extractions, fragments of encrypted strings written in strange syntax. Titan lay at her feet, not asleep, just alert in stillness. Every so often he shifted the position of his head, one ear perking subtly each time a new image flashed on the screen. Across the table sat Agent Helen Shaw, fingers moving steadily across her laptop, eyes locked on the structured columns of compiled data. She had worked more than 40 missing persons cases. Many of them had no resolution. But this time was different. This time, there was structure. There was a system. A cold, deliberate logic. "They're not choosing victims at random," Shaw said, her voice calm, steady. "They're sorting, like they're collecting." Deanna nodded. She had never expected to see this kind of data outside of arms trafficking cases. But every metric, every behavioral note pulled from the USB had been tracked with precision, the kind that only came from weeks, maybe months, of surveillance. Shaw turned her screen toward Deanna. "This is movement pattern analysis. Camera data around the schools where these children were tracked. It's been layered according to the suspect's known schedule." On the screen, red dots lit up in clusters, a spread of elementary schools scattered across residential neighborhoods. The pattern was clear. Moderate income areas, gaps in school security, and most notably, no K-9 units on campus. Deanna gave a quiet nod, then lowered herself to the floor beside Titan. She ran her hand gently along the thick fur at the base of his neck. "You're the reason their eyes were seen," she whispered, just loud enough for Titan to hear, just clear enough for Shaw to understand. And that was when the projection screen flashed a new image. A small pink object, lying on a stretch of concrete near the playground fence. Titan stood up, instantly. Helen Shaw enlarged the map. On the screen was a digital satellite overlay filled with behavioral data. Red, orange, and yellow marks dotted the landscape, each one signaling a recorded instance of attempted student contact over the past 8 months. No one in the room spoke. Only the quiet taps of keystrokes and the soft shuffle of Titan's paws as he shifted his position filled the silence. Shaw switched the screen to behavior analysis mode. "We have 14 elementary schools," she said, "across 3 states, Illinois, Indiana, and Colorado. Every one of them shares 3 common factors." She picked up a red marker and underlined each point on the whiteboard. First fixed dismissal window, 3 o'clock to 3:15 p.m. They never approach during class hours, never when crowds are heavy. They choose low traffic moments, when late pickups begin and school security begins rotating shifts. Second, compromised or misaligned security cameras. Most campus cameras are mounted high, but with poor coverage over pickup zones. 3 schools even had camera outages in the exact locations where contact was made. 3. The suspects present themselves as family members, grandfather, uncle, godparent, family friend. They say the child's name. They know the teacher's name, and most of them carry forged IDs that pass a casual inspection. Deanna stood, stepped closer to the board. So, their system isn't just surveillance. They have a database. Shaw nodded. She clicked into another tab on the monitor, a file labeled Family Contacts version 2.csv. Rows of information scrolled down the screen. Student names, parent phone numbers, workplaces, names of approved pickup contacts, even seemingly trivial notes like Dad usually wears a blue shirt or Mom often arrives late on Fridays. They're not just abducting children, Shaw said, her voice lower than usual. They're infiltrating like they belong. And because they seem like family, we react too late. Deanna glanced down at Titan. He was still staring at the screen, eyes locked on the image of a pink cap lying just beyond the schoolyard fence. Not all machines raise alarms when something feels wrong, but Titan was different. He's not persuaded by words, Deanna murmured. He only believes what doesn't fit. And this time, what didn't fit was a sense of familiarity crafted too perfectly. The cloth doll, the piece of evidence found in the man's backpack at Elmridge, now rested inside a scent-sealed nylon pouch placed on the stainless steel table in the evidence room. The overhead light cast a stark glow across its surface, highlighting every worn thread, especially along the ear where the fabric had been chewed and frayed. Deanna removed her gloves and knelt beside Titan. "Do you remember?" she whispered, her hand resting gently at his collar. Titan didn't look at her. Instead, he leaned slightly forward toward the table. Shaw stood nearby and gave a nod. A technician in a clean room suit stepped forward, slid on a pair of fresh gloves, and carefully unsealed the pouch. Slowly, they lifted the doll out and placed it onto a cold metal tray. No words were needed. Titan moved forward. He didn't lunge like he had at the leather bag. He didn't growl, didn't strain at the leash. He approached with steady, measured steps, calm, controlled, as if he already knew that what lay in front of him was no longer a suspicion. It was a memory. At about 50 centimeters away, Titan stopped. His nose began to twitch. His ears perked. A low sound, barely audible, more breath than voice, slipped from his chest. "A soft alert sound," Deanna explained quietly. "Not aggressive. This is a match signal. He recognizes the scent." Shaw nodded to the technician operating the camera. "Log full body behavior, track nasal pacing, monitor jaw tension." Titan sniffed around the doll 3 full times. Then he sat down. What happened next made the entire room still. Titan tilted his head, just slightly, and let out a soft exhale, almost like a whine. No one had trained him to do that. There was no command, no behavioral cue. It was not learned. It was instinct. Like when an elderly person hears a familiar sound from a long-lost childhood. Deanna didn't move. "You know who held this," she murmured. Titan gently placed his chin on the edge of the tray. Not to rest, but to guard it, as if refusing to let it be taken, as if he would not allow it to disappear again. Shaw closed her eyes for a second. When she opened them, her voice was firm, steady. "Pull all stored data on Elena Foster. Immediate priority update. We have every reason to believe she is still alive." In the final file found within the folder, labeled Logs Internal Transfer Notes, a string of encrypted messages appeared. The encryption used an outdated algorithm, the kind once favored by underground networks involved in illegal financial transactions across Eastern Europe. It was a relic, but one designed to keep secrets hidden in plain sight. Agent Helen Shaw sat at the large monitor, her face lit by the pale blue glow of the screen. Every angle of her expression was tight with focus. Beside her, a young technician stared at the decryption output, his hands trembling slightly. On the screen, a single message unfolded. E04 delivered. Safe house P22. Status stable. Check line clear. Below the message was a set of coordinates: 50.0755 degrees north, 14.4378 degrees east. It pointed to the northern edge of Prague in the Czech Republic. No one in the room spoke for several seconds. The silence was broken only by the sound of Titan inhaling, then exhaling slowly, a heavy breath that seemed to press against the walls of the operations room. Shaw pressed the intercom. Her voice was clear and firm. Connect to Interpol. Request coordination to scan unregistered private storage locations near Site P22 on the outskirts of Prague. She turned toward Deanna, who stood just a few feet away. I know you're not federal. You're local law enforcement. But if you and Titan are willing to go, I can put you on a transport with the team. Deanna looked at Titan. He was sitting calmly, still facing the screen. His ears tilted slightly, as if picking up a frequency no one else could hear. If he recognizes the scent, she said quietly, then we'll go. We don't need clearance, we need purpose. Shaw nodded once, not as a formality, but with a quiet understanding. Elena may still be alive. And if this network is functioning the way the data suggests, she isn't the last child in danger. The screen changed. Satellite images zoomed in on a rusted metal warehouse. It sat in the middle of an abandoned industrial zone. No signs, no activity, but there were tire tracks in the dirt, left within the past 3 days. Deanna reached down, clipped the leash to Titan's collar, and rose to her feet. We're going to Prague, she said. Titan didn't make a sound. He didn't bark or move suddenly, but his entire body shifted forward by a fraction, a subtle lean, the kind that made it clear he already understood. And in that quiet movement, the distance between a warehouse on the far side of the world and the breath of a girl still waiting began to close. The flight departed at 10:40 p.m. from O'Hare International Airport, unlisted on any commercial booking system. On paper, the passenger list belonged to a group of telecommunications engineers en route to a conference. In reality, it was a joint task force led by the FBI and Interpol, headed by Agent Helen Shaw and accompanied by 2 senior officers from the Czech Republic's International Crime Division. Seated near the rear of the cabin, Deanna Rodriguez wore plain clothes and stared out the small window beside her. Beneath the thick blanket of clouds, the lights of the city below blurred into something distant, like the edge of a memory. At her feet, Titan lay still, a faded K9 patch stitched into the worn fabric of his collar. This mission had no summons. It wasn't official for her, but for Titan, it was the only chance to finish something that had been left incomplete. You ready? Deanna asked softly. Titan didn't respond with movement. He simply lifted his head and inhaled gently into her open palm. It was a familiar gesture, one from the days when they worked side by side on high-risk operations. But this time, the breath he took wasn't to detect explosives. It was to remember the scent of a child he had never met. When the plane touched down at Václav Havel Airport at 1:12 p.m. local time, an armored vehicle from the Czech Criminal Police was already waiting. Behind the wheel sat Lieutenant Colonel Marek Dvořák, a veteran investigator of cybercrime and transnational human trafficking for nearly a decade. The intel from the FBI came just in time, he said in crisp English, his voice dry and measured. Warehouses like this, unregistered, unmarked, off-grid, are the kind we've lost track of for years. Shaw unfolded a printed satellite map across her lap. There are fresh tire tracks, A cell phone pinged nearby just days ago, and there's a behavioral alert from a dog I've learned not to question. Dvořák glanced at Titan through the rearview mirror. He used to be in service? No longer on record, Deanna replied, running her fingers over Titan's coat. But instinct doesn't retire. The vehicle sped through the narrow, stone-paved streets of Prague, crossing the Charles Bridge before turning into the northern industrial zone, a place where the street lamps grew sparse and moss climbed up cracked cement walls. When the vehicle came to a stop, Titan didn't wait for the door to open. He was already sitting up. Ears forward, still, ready. No command was needed. He already knew. He was in the right place. The industrial complex was tucked behind an old power substation, more than 30 minutes' drive from the center of Prague. It had once served as a heavy metal processing plant during the Cold War, but had been abandoned for nearly 2 decades. Moss clung to the gray concrete walls, the corrugated metal roof was rusted through in places, and the roll-up door was dented and welded shut from the inside. No signage, no official entrance. The task force of 8 split into 2 teams. Helen Shaw led the front unit, Deanna at her side, with Titan trailing behind them like a shadow. The support team included Czech criminal officers and a tactical lock specialist, not military, not police, the kind of expert only called when the problem wasn't a lock, but a line someone was willing to cross. There's a weak power signal from the west side of the structure, one officer reported. No security cameras, but the auxiliary power system might be live. Shaw marked the position on the map, tapping the northern edge of the building. We'll approach from here. There's a runoff trench beneath the wall. If they're using this place for storage, we'll likely find signs of movement. Titan didn't wait for instructions. While the team discussed routes and strategy, he slipped into a narrow path between 2 crumbling concrete walls and stopped at a patch of gravel stained with oil. He stood still, his head lowered, nose pressed to the ground. He started, Deanna said softly, already moving to follow him. From his breathing, he's tracking movement, not chemicals. You mean he's not sniffing for substances? Merrick asked. No, she replied, eyes fixed on Titan. He's tracking people. Titan stopped in front of a small metal door, almost entirely hidden by moss, and set back into a recessed wall. There was no handle, no lock visible from the outside. Deanna crouched beside him, pressing her fingertips to the concrete. It was cold, but not dry. Someone was standing here, not long ago. The lock specialist stepped forward, attaching a vibration sensor to the doorframe. A soft beep confirmed his finding. There's a false floor inside, hollow beneath. Shaw signaled. 3 officers pulled back to perimeter positions, while one moved forward with a breaching tool. The charge was small, just enough to snap internal fasteners without triggering a larger reaction. The door gave way with a sudden pop. Inside, there was nothing but darkness. No sound, no echo. Deanna switched on her headlamp. Titan stepped forward, calm and silent, drawn by a scent only he could understand. As he crossed the threshold and disappeared into the dark, the silence within the underground chamber began to tremble. Inside the underground chamber was a narrow corridor, damp and low-ceilinged, the walls flaking with crumbling plaster. The scent of rusted metal mixed with rotting wood hung in the air like a thick layer of memory, clinging to the chest of every person who stepped inside. Flashlights swept across each corner. No voices, no machinery. Only the muted crunch of footsteps over shattered tiles, and the sound of Titan breathing. He didn't growl, he didn't bark, but each of Titan's breaths now seemed to brush against something unseen, something no modern sensor or thermal scan had caught. Deanna walked close behind him, one hand resting lightly on the leash, not to restrain him, but to remain connected. She knew if Titan stopped, It wouldn't be hesitation. It would be decision. At a left-hand bend in the hallway, just outside the beam of the overhead lights, Titan came to a sudden halt. He tilted his head. A thread of silence stretched thin. Then a shiver. A sound so soft it could have passed for wind slipping through a crack in the stone, but it wasn't. It was breathing, uneven, faint, interrupted, but alive. Deanna raised her hand, signaling the team to stop. "There's someone behind this wall," she said. Shaw stepped forward and aimed her light. Brickwork sealed with cement. No door, no opening, but the ground at the base of the wall was damp, darker than the rest of the floor. Titan sat down, chest pressed flat to the earth, head resting gently against the wall. "He hears it," Deanna whispered, her eyes tracing the rise and fall of Titan's breath. A soft whine came from his throat. Urgent, but quiet, the specific call used by working dogs when they detect life. "Dig here," she said firmly. "Right now." Marek signaled the engineering team. A wall-penetrating sensor was placed against the bricks. Within seconds, the monitor showed faint thermal fluctuation, 37 degrees Celsius, small, motionless, but breathing. No one said a word. Titan whined again, louder this time, insistent. Deanna placed a hand on his head. "Good boy, old friend," she said, her voice catching at the edges. "That child just needs you a little longer. Prepare to breach the wall. Thickness, 25 centimeters. Old load-bearing brick, no rebar." The command came quietly. There were no alarms, no shouting. Everything moved with the urgency of emergency, but without noise. Everyone in the room understood that on the other side of that rough brick wall, a life was still holding on, with fragile breaths, and perhaps with the faint hope that someone was still looking. Titan was led back to a safe distance, but he didn't take his eyes off the wall. Not when the first chunk of plaster cracked loose. Not when the sound of hammers struck stone in sharp echoes. He remained completely still, like a stone shaped by patience. Brick by brick, the wall began to fall. Dust filled the air. A narrow opening appeared, first the width of a hand, then enough for an arm, then wide enough for someone to crawl through. "Is anyone there?" Deanna called out. Her voice was soft but clear. No reply came. Then, a sound from within. Not a voice, not a cry, just something soft dropping to the ground. Fabric. A flashlight cut through the dusty dark. Everyone held their breath. And there, in the hazy beam, they saw a small body curled in the far corner of the concrete room. Tangled blonde hair, pale skin, arms wrapped around an old coat. Beside her lay a pink cap, dusty but still clearly embroidered with white thread. Elena. "She's alive!" one officer shouted. "Pulse is steady." The medics surged forward. A narrow stretcher was slid through the gap. Elena wasn't fully conscious, but when a nurse's hand touched her cheek, the girl flinched gently. A reflex, faint but unmistakably human. Deanna stood at the entrance, eyes fixed on Titan. He had come close to the wall again. No barking, no sudden movements, just a tilt of his head, watching the child, as if confirming that it was the right one, that she had been found. Behind her, Shaw exhaled sharply, her voice still shaky as she spoke into the radio. "This is Prague Command Unit. Confirmed identification of victim Elena Foster, age 6, alive, being transported for medical attention. Phase 1 complete." As Elena was carried out from the cold underground room, Titan lifted his head and sniffed the air. The girl stirred. Her eyes opened just slightly. And in that half-awake moment, before she recognized anyone in the room, she reached out and touched Titan's nose with the tip of her finger. "Dog," she whispered. "You smell like my doll." Deanna let out a soft laugh, broken by tears. Yes, she said. Because he found your doll. To find you. The Central Coordination Room, where Helen Shaw and the Federal Analysis Team had relocated following the rescue of Elena, was now crowded with whiteboards, satellite maps, data strings, and case profile photographs. Everything pointed back to a name that had now been officially added to the highest level of the international most wanted list. Victor Hayes. But the deeper Shaw went, the clearer it became. He wasn't working alone. What Victor had built didn't resemble a traditional criminal ring. It looked more like a sophisticated enterprise. There were branches, logistics, internal reporting systems, and, most critically, individuals responsible for each region. This isn't a classic mafia operation, said the Interpol data analyst who had joined the task force. The way he structured the network is more like an underground corporation. Each area has a gatekeeper, someone in charge of selection, evaluation, and managing the supply. Under the harsh fluorescence of the overhead lights, the diagrams became more detailed. Each country functioned as an independent zone. There were at least 6 confirmed reception points active within the last 2 years. Each point was connected to IP addresses masked under the guise of non-governmental organizations. They hide under the umbrella of charity, Shaw said, flipping through a folder of old field reports. Children's relief programs, housing for disaster victims, educational outreach, all with one thing in common: none of them registered with any official government body. This wasn't a fast-moving operation. There were no chaotic exchanges, no messy deals. Every file, every child, was selected, analyzed, and invested in, like a high-value commodity. They don't abduct, Deanna said quietly. They recruit from the shadows, from places where familiarity has become a weapon. By keeping the network fractured and connected only through encrypted channels, Victor Hayes had evolved beyond the role of a perpetrator. He had become an architect, leaving no trail, no traceable footprint, but every action bore a signature, a design. And what unsettled Shaw most wasn't the scale of the system. It was its silence. No gunfire, no turf wars, no brute force. Just nods between people who understood the same purpose. Victor Hayes wasn't running an organization. He was building a method. And that method was multiplying. In a secured lab separated from the main operations center, 3 large monitors cast a pale glow across the room. Their displays were stark: black backgrounds, blue text, an interface that looked dated but was instantly familiar to anyone who had ever stepped into the darker corners of the internet. This wasn't a place to search. It was a place to reveal who was hiding. A cybersecurity analyst pointed to the far left screen. The forum is called Pavilion. The layout is minimal, looks like a private discussion board. But deeper in, there's a classification system, submission forms, and a structured hierarchy. Shaw stepped closer, arms crossed. How many users? Over 300 active accounts in the last 6 months. Each user has a rank. Each rank requires a submission, either a profile, images, or harvested data. One of the tabs opened to a directory. Submissions greater than North America, greater than Illinois, greater than primary targets. Inside were dozens of PDF files, none bearing real names, only encoded identifiers and disturbing notes. Subject 12, F, quiet, compliant, observed 5 days, no father figure, walks home alone Wednesdays. Subject 09B, high value, light-colored hair, soft demeanor, responds to strangers, single parent. Each file had a photo. None taken up close, none showing clear faces, but each one framed deliberately. A schoolyard, a corner of a front lawn, a bus stop. No picture was casual. Every image was a crop from a long lens camera or a hidden phone. Shaw's voice dropped to almost a whisper. They don't just pick vulnerable kids. They choose kids with no voice, kids who aren't easily believed, kids whose stories are often dismissed. Deanna sat behind Titan, her gaze fixed on the screen. Another tab opened. Catalog. Processed, transferred. The list was encrypted, each name reduced to a code, but one detail repeated across the records. Approved by VH. Victor Hayes approved every single one, the analyst said. He's the final signature before a child disappears. A soft ping broke the silence. The system had just flagged a live connection, using the same Pavilion protocol, routed through an anonymous IP from Southeast Asia. Shaw narrowed her eyes. We're not done. Pavilion isn't just a vault, it's a marketplace, and he is the one naming the price. No one spoke. In the cold blue light of that small room, Titan let out a low sound deep in his chest. Not because he understood what the darknet was, but because he knew better than anyone. When a child is treated like an object, their scent changes. They no longer smell like children. On the main screen, a scorecard appeared, but it wasn't from any school system. It was a behavioral evaluation framework developed by Victor Hayes himself. He called it the Behavioral Yield Index. The index displayed hundreds of coded child profiles categorized by age, family circumstances, personality, social response, emotional attachment to guardians, and one final column labeled noise factor, a metric measuring the likelihood of resistance, disruption, or the ability to call for help. The less likely a child is to react when approached, the higher their score, the cybersecurity analyst explained. They prioritize low-disruption targets, easy to lead away, easily mistaken for being with a relative, easily erased. Shaw scanned the list. 2 names caught her attention at the top of the chart. Candidate MS08, Maya Summers. B. Candidate LC07, Lucy Carter. Both were under observation, Deanna said, stepping closer. Lucy was nearly taken. The attempt would have succeeded, if not for Titan's unexpected reaction. She pointed at the far right column of Lucy's row. Under noise factor, the child had been rated low, but next to the score was a red slash marked in bold. Unanticipated interruption, canine presence, behavioral deviation triggered. Shaw leaned in, studying the note. That's what broke the model, she said. A dog, not on their map, not in the forecast, not under control, and not willing to ignore the scent. Titan was lying near the door, eyes half shut. But at the mention of canine presence, his ears flicked, a faint wave of memory moving through him. He didn't just stop a kidnapping, Deanna said softly. He disrupted their system, Victor's entire behavioral framework, built on precision and prediction, cracked under something raw, something unprogrammable, something real. In Victor's larger diagram, everything was built to operate silently, perfectly. Nothing left behind. No ripples, no noise. But Titan didn't need diagrams. He needed only a scent. And it was that scent, that first growl in the Elm Ridge schoolyard, that marked the system's first failure. The one variable Victor didn't account for. Maya and Lucy, Shaw murmured, were supposed to be just 2 more numbers on the transfer list. But now they're alive, she continued, because of a dog no longer listed in any unit, and an instinct no algorithm can replicate. Sometimes an entire architecture of evil begins to collapse. Because of a single growl no one taught, but everyone hears. On Wednesday morning, before the sun had even risen, a call from the Fusion Center, the federal information sharing hub between the FBI and local police units, jolted Helen Shaw awake. North Point Elementary, the voice on the line said. Near El Paso, right along the Texas-Mexico border. A teacher reported a man approaching a student after school. No force used. He had documents, claimed to be a legal guardian, but the student refused to go. At first glance, The details sounded like hundreds of other reports, sometimes a misunderstanding, sometimes a family member who forgot to notify the school in advance. But the last detail made Shaw sit up in bed. The student said, "He knew my name. He knew my mom's name, but he didn't smell like a good person." That was all Shaw needed. She called Deanna Rodriguez immediately. She didn't explain, just said one sentence. "Deanna, there's a little girl who smelled something wrong." 4 hours later, a black SUV without plates rolled south along U.S. Route 180. In the passenger seat, Titan lay still. His head was lifted, eyes fixed, unblinking. It had been 10 days since the rescue of Elena in Prague. And since then, Titan had been calm, unshaken by drills, traffic, or routine shifts. But this morning, when Deanna clipped on the leash and said the words "school grounds," Titan had stood up on his own. North Point Elementary sat quietly in the middle of a modest residential neighborhood. No gate cameras, no full-time security, just 2 staff members on duty after dismissal, and a long pickup lane that fed into a side street. The only traffic camera in the area had been out of service for over a month. "She's in 2nd grade," the principal explained when Deanna arrived. "Her name is Amber Liu. Her mother usually picks her up around 3:30, but that day, a middle-aged man in a white shirt approached. He spoke very softly. Said he had a note from the grandmother." The principal paused. "But Amber's mother doesn't have a mother. She was raised in foster care. No known relatives." Deanna looked to Titan. He stood in the entranceway of the school, not moving forward, not stepping back, just standing exactly where Amber had last stood. And then, in a breath's shift, the wind changed. Titan snapped his head to the right, fast, sharp, as if pulled by a line only he could feel. He began to walk. No hesitation. Deanna whispered, almost breathless, "We're starting again." The alley beside North Point Elementary was little more than a shortcut leading to an open lot, a patch of cracked asphalt where a few old utility vans often sat quietly in the late afternoon. No fence, no surveillance cameras, just a thin coat of dust on the pavement and a few tire marks, fresh enough to raise questions. Deanna didn't need to tug the leash. Titan had already gone ahead. He didn't run, he didn't growl, but he moved with the quiet certainty of something that had caught a scent that didn't belong. "Were there any vehicles here at the time of the incident?" Deanna asked the principal as they rounded the back of the school. "We assumed it was a maintenance crew," the principal replied. "But no one's claimed it. It wasn't school staff." As they turned the corner at the far edge of the playground, Titan stopped. His front legs spread wide, head lowered, ears raised and sharp. A low, tight sound escaped his throat. Not loud, but unmistakable. It was the kind of sound that comes from a creature who's spent nights guarding border lines and knows when a predator is hiding in the silence. At the edge of the lot sat a white cargo van. Old, no license plate, front windows covered with drawn curtains. Still, unmoving. But the scent was fresh. Titan began circling the vehicle, each step slow and exact, moving like a breath through the wind, hugging the sides of the metal. He stopped at the sliding side door, pressing his nose to the thin seam in the steel. A series of short, sharp breaths followed. Deanna approached slowly, eyes fixed on the door. "What do you smell?" she asked under her breath. Titan growled, a sound different from any she'd heard before. Not a warning, a blockade. Deanna's hand moved to her belt, drawing her radio. "This is Rodriguez. I need immediate support at the lot behind North Point Elementary. We have a suspicious vehicle, possible occupant inside, believed linked to the Pavilion network." Just then, a faint sound from inside the van. Metal, barely audible, a shift. But Titan reacted instantly. He launched upward, landing both front paws against the sliding door, snarling. From behind the curtain, a shadow moved. Deanna drew her weapon. Her voice was calm, but firm. "Exit the vehicle now. Hands on your head. Drop whatever you're holding." No response. Then the engine roared to life, sudden and aggressive, like a punch into the tension-laden air. "He's trying to run!" an arriving officer shouted. But Titan was already in motion. He leapt from the side door, swung around the front of the van, and in the next instant launched onto the hood like age meant nothing. His claws struck the windshield. The figure inside recoiled, panicked. Deanna charged forward, slamming her palm against the driver's door. "Out of the vehicle, now!" The door swung open, and the face inside wasn't unfamiliar. The face behind the van door was that of a man in his 50s, unshaven, hair slick with sweat. His eyes darted wildly, the kind of eyes that belonged to someone used to running, but not smart enough to know when there was nowhere left to run. "Out of the vehicle! Hands on your head!" Deanna barked. Instead of complying, the man yanked the door wider and bolted around the back of the van, but he didn't make it far. Before he could even clear the edge of the lot, Titan launched from the hood like a living arrow. He slammed into the man's knee with a turning force that sent the whole body spinning and crashing to the ground. The suspect tumbled across the gravel, screaming in panic. "I didn't do anything. I just drive the van." Deanna dropped to her knee, securing his wrists behind his back. Another officer arrived and placed a steadying hand on Titan, who was panting hard but didn't break eye contact with the suspect. His stance remained rigid, watchful. "Name?" Deanna demanded. Ray Dempsey," he stammered, turning his head, trying to shield his face with his shoulder. Deanna didn't need to tighten the cuffs. He didn't resist. But his eyes kept flicking around, searching for someone behind him or fearing someone watching from far beyond. Inside the front seat, buried under crumpled papers and a backpack reeking of cigarette smoke, they found what mattered most. An envelope. Inside was a USB, scrawled in red marker. Backup list. Move early before August 15th. When decrypted, it held 3 PDF files. Each file was a detailed dossier on a child. Photos, behavioral notes, home and school schedules, parental routines, psychological summaries. One profile stopped them cold. Initials. A.L. Amber Le, the second-grade girl from a North Point elementary. The same child who had refused to go with the strange man 2 days earlier. 10 minutes later, Helen Shaw arrived at the scene. She said nothing, but the way her eyes locked on the USB said more than any briefing could. This wasn't over. Not yet. Deanna knelt beside Titan, running her fingers gently down his back. "You were right again." Titan didn't bark, but the way he looked at Ray Dempsey, as the man was loaded into the back of a secured transport, said everything. It was the look of judgment, and it didn't need words. Interrogation Room 3 at the El Paso Police Department was small. The ceiling hung low, and the walls were painted in a dull silver gray. Fluorescent lights flickered slightly overhead, casting a thin glow across the scratched stainless steel table in the center. Ray Dempsey sat across from Helen Shaw and Deanna Rodriguez. One wrist was cuffed to the chair. Sweat had pooled beneath his collar. He still wore the same faded dress shirt, now wrinkled, heavy with the scent of panic. He gave a weak laugh when asked the first question. "I'm just the driver. I deliver packages. I don't know what's inside." Shaw didn't respond with words. She reached into a file and laid the USB down on the table, followed by a color printout from one of the PDF files, a photo of Amber Lou smiling, holding a cup of milk in her schoolyard. It was clearly taken from a distance, through a car window. Surveillance. "You deliver using a 7-year-old child?" Ray swallowed hard. "I didn't touch her. I just Follow directions. I don't choose who. I don't know how they pick. Deanna leaned back in her chair, her tone low. And the directions come from who, Ray? I don't know real names, he muttered. Just nicknames. Encrypted messages, no calls. I never see their faces. I don't ask. But you took their money. I needed the money. For what? For walking a child into a van and disappearing with her? Ray slammed his hand against the table, his voice breaking. I didn't take them. I never laid a hand on any of them. Shaw tilted her head, her voice harder now. But you knew someone else would be waiting. Someone would take over. All you had to do was drop her off, at the right place, at the right time, like a package. Silence. Ray lowered his head, breathing fast. Not from rage. From the slow realization that he was not getting out. Deanna slid a second photo across the table. This one showed Titan, standing in front of the white van, eyes locked on Ray at the moment he'd been handcuffed. You recognize this dog? She asked. Ray looked at the photo, blinked, then recoiled, shoulders drawing in as if by instinct. He looked at me like I'd already done something. You hadn't, Deanna said, but you would have, and he knew it before you did. Shaw rose to her feet, retrieving the USB. We don't need your confession. The network you worked for will unravel itself. Once we pull the messages, the keys, the wallets. But if you want to salvage even a shred of your face in this world, you can start by saying a real name. Ray looked up, and for the first time since the interrogation began, his expression fractured. They call him the architect. I never met him, but he doesn't just give orders. He builds everything. Deanna turned to Shaw. No words were exchanged. There was no need. Victor Hayes wasn't just behind the curtain. He was the design, the axis, and stopping what he created would require more than a warrant. It would require people like Ray. Finally speaking, after returning to the U.S. from the rescue operation in Prague and the capture of Ray Dempsey, Deanna didn't go home. She and Titan were redirected straight to the Federal Data Analysis Center in Quantico, where the next battleground wasn't a dusty schoolyard or an empty parking lot, but buried inside lines of data long dismissed as unrelated. Helen Shaw was already waiting inside Level 2 Strategic Command. A massive digital map of the United States spread across the touch-sensitive wall. Red, green, and yellow dots flickered in rhythm with live data feeds. They weren't crime scenes. They were almost crime scenes. We've started stitching together the scattered incident reports from the last 24 months, Shaw said. What we're seeing isn't just international transit like Prague. It's domestic, an internal corridor for child movement, across state lines, through soft borders like bus stations, roadside motels, and rented warehouses outside city limits. GPS data extracted from the white cargo van Ray had driven revealed a disturbing pattern. Locations that matched no known active investigations, yet carried strange anomalies. Students reported not getting home on time. Unknown men lingered near school gates. Cameras lost signal for precisely timed intervals. Not enough to open a case file, Deanna said quietly. But enough, Shaw replied, for a child to vanish. One encrypted email pulled from Ray's laptop seemed like gibberish at first, but once decoded, it revealed a list of pending target locations, annotated with weather conditions, campus security coverage, even the exact time of sunset. They don't choose schools, Shaw murmured. They choose the space between layers of protection. Beneath the surface of that data was a supply chain, not a trafficking route in the traditional sense, but a logistics line, cruelly precise. A system where children were the commodity, and trust was the warehouse being broken into. Deanna reached across the desk and picked up 2 photos from an earlier case report. Maya and Lucy. She held the edge of the printouts with both hands, like she needed the weight of something real to stay grounded. We haven't cut out the route yet, but if we can trace this corridor, maybe we'll know where they'll move next. At her feet, Titan lay silently. He didn't need to be called. He only lifted his head, ears raised, just as the map lit up again. A new point appeared, glowing at the southern edge of Arizona. A sign, a scent, a shift. The fourth-floor strategy room at FBI headquarters had transformed into the core nerve center for mapping the behavioral blueprint of an invisible predator. Across one full wall stretched a national digital map, glowing with scattered points, not of crimes committed, but of patterns. Below it ran rows upon rows of data: timestamps, weather conditions, victim responses, approach tactics. No one called it a case map anymore. Shaw gave it a different name: the silence map. Because every red dot glowing on that screen, from Illinois, Colorado, Texas, Arizona, marked places where nothing was heard. No screaming, no reports filed, no police alerts, only lost camera footage for a few minutes. Kids coming home late and saying nothing. Teachers later remembering, "There was someone by the gate that day, someone I didn't recognize." And now each dot was being re-sniffed by Titan, not with his nose, but with memory. By combining GPS logs, route overlays, and behavioral analysis, the Bureau's behavioral specialists constructed a new predictive model, one that didn't rely on crimes already committed, but on preparations made. Victor Hayes doesn't pick locations based on population maps, Deanna said, scanning the layers of data. He picks where routine has made people turn off their instincts. The map started to reveal terrifying consistencies. Every site had been surveilled for at least a month. Every school lacked permanent security or K-9 presence. The approach zones were always blind spots: traffic corridors, side alleys, empty lots adjacent to school exits. Worse still, many of the locations had previously been flagged in minor reports, then dismissed for lacking enough to be considered criminal. "We're not tracking a criminal," Shaw said. "We're tracking a mindset, a methodology." She pointed to the screen, and every time that method failed, something had broken the model. A temporary camera, a last-minute change in staff, or— She looked down. A dog that growled at the exact right moment. Titan lay quietly beneath the table. But when the map lit up with a new cluster, 3 tightly grouped points along the California corridor between Oakland and San Jose, he lifted his head. His body leaned forward, his nose tilted toward the screen. No one said a word. They didn't need to. Everyone in the room understood exactly what was happening. He had just smelled the map. No one called Titan a working dog anymore. Since Prague and North Point, his name had been listed separately in federal case files, marked under a new designation: Non-Standard Sensory Response Subject, supports behavioral crime reconstruction. It sounded clinical, like the description of a tool. But anyone who had ever seen Titan move through a scene, pause beside a forgotten toy, or lower his head next to a faint smudge of mud on a child's shoe, knew the truth. He wasn't a tool. He was a silent witness. At the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Division, agents reconstructed the corridor model using mapped data, camera timestamps, and old physical evidence from incidents that had never led to formal investigations. And among all the resources brought to the table, only Titan could respond to a kind of signal no technician could replicate: the scent of emotional residue. "We're not looking for physical smells," Deanna explained. "Titan reacts to what lingers in a contact zone. Not blood, not chemicals, but traces of trauma." There was a child's jacket recovered from the cargo hold of a truck, washed clean, no stains, no foreign DNA. But when Titan approached it, he gave a low growl, then stepped back 2 paces. The exact pattern he showed when detecting fear imprinted deeply over time. At a checkpoint in Arizona, Traffic cameras had once captured a man leading a young girl across a sidewalk, their faces obscured. Titan didn't respond when shown the video, but when the team extracted a sample of roadside soil from where the girl had been standing, a clump of damp sand and dust, Titan pressed his nose into it, held it there, then raised his head. Once. Just once. He marked the moment, Shaw said. The scent lined up, but only within a 2-hour window. From that, we tracked the van to a produce cold storage lot, pulled the license plate from a backup dock camera. No map could plot the world the way Titan responded. No algorithm could predict the moment he would stop walking, tilt his head, or growl low beneath his breath. But each of those small actions, when charted together, revealed something the entire system had been missing: the living rhythm of a child under watch. Titan didn't read data, but he read disruption. And that disruption, the quiet rift in Victor Hayes's perfect model, was the first true crack. While the rest of us stare at numbers, Deanna said, Titan hears what never made it into any report: the sound of fear that was once held in silence. Night had settled over the Federal Command Center, casting a sterile, cold light from screens that refused to rest. The data kept running. The mouse kept gliding, line by line. But in the air, something had begun to fold in on itself. Instinct. Titan lay still beneath Deanna's desk. He hadn't closed his eyes since late afternoon. His gaze remained steady, unblinking. Each breath moved slowly through his nose, deep and measured, like he was holding on to a scent that memory hadn't yet let go. Helen Shaw was the first to find the file. It was hidden inside a folder labeled California Projected Paths, buried among hundreds of encrypted logs and coded instructions. The name of the file was too plain, too calm. It chilled her. Batch 31. Oh, she opened it. Her eyes froze on the third line. She didn't need to say it out loud. No one in the room needed a key to decipher it. MS. 8 years old. Elmridge Elementary. 89%. Scheduled. August 17th. Maya Summers. The girl who once stood alone on the stone steps of a quiet schoolyard, counting red cars just to pass the time. The one who tilted her head and whispered that he doesn't smell like a real grandfather. Now, she was listed under scheduled delivery. Deanna stepped behind Shaw, not yet speaking. She hadn't even formed the question when her eyes landed on the name. And at that exact moment, Titan stood up. No growl, no bark. He just moved. Slowly. Deliberately. As if he had known this all along. As if the name Maya had never left the scent map etched in his memory since that quiet autumn day at Elmridge. Titan stepped toward the screen, lowering his nose to the corner of the display. He didn't touch it. He just drew in a long, full breath, then lifted his head. Deanna placed her hand gently on his collar, but Titan leaned forward again, not waiting for a signal. He already knew this one was his. Shaw stood up. No additional reports needed. No cross-checks. No simulations. He hasn't stopped, she said softly. And Maya is not safe. Deanna didn't answer. She tightened her grip on the leash. Titan took a step forward. Not because someone told him to, but because somewhere, a child was afraid. And he had smelled it, long before anyone could find the words. The small room behind the Elmridge Elementary Library was always quiet at lunchtime. Beneath pale yellow lighting and shelves lined with worn book spines sat an old wooden table. And there, leaning over it with sleeves smudged in color, was Maya, 8 years old, her hair tied low, her focus fixed, carefully sketching as though every pencil stroke had to protect something sacred inside her. The paper was thick, slightly creased at the corner. In the center of the page stood a German shepherd, upright, ears alert, eyes wide and intelligent. But this wasn't Titan lying quietly as he usually did in real life. In her drawing, Titan wore a red cape, flowing behind him as if caught in a breeze. Around his neck was a collar with a star. Beneath his feet, Maya had drawn two children, one clutching a book, the other crying. Both held on to the edge of Titan's cape, as if he were the still center of a storm. "I'm going to tape this up in class," Maya whispered as the librarian approached. "I want the other kids to know. He's a real superhero." The librarian sat beside her, smiling gently. "What do you think makes Titan a hero?" Maya didn't answer right away. She looked at the drawing, tilted her head. "Because he doesn't need anyone to tell him. He just knows from the beginning." Some adults might have chalked that up to a child's imagination. But Deanna, who had once seen Titan growl in the middle of the schoolyard and stop a stranger in his tracks, knew better. There were things Titan sensed long before human reason could catch up. Maya folded the drawing carefully, placed it inside a cream-colored envelope, and scribbled across the front in soft pencil. "To Titan, my superhero." That day, Titan wasn't in the library. He was lying under the old maple tree behind the playground, eyes closed, breathing slow. But when Maya approached with the envelope in hand, he opened one eye, just slightly, as if he already knew something important was being offered. No words needed. From that afternoon forward, Titan picked up a new habit. Every time Maya left class, no matter where he was, whether by the library steps, under the tree, or near the water fountain, he would rise, walk to the classroom door, and wait. No one had trained him to do this. No one asked him to. But Titan always knew when Maya was about to appear, and when she did, he wouldn't run or wag his tail excitedly. He would simply walk alongside her, a quiet satellite orbiting a small, steady world. Maya began talking to him in her own way. She would sit on the steps, place her lunchbox next to him, and murmur like a breath. "Today the teacher called me the quiet one. Do you think being quiet is good or bad?" Titan never answered, not in the way people expect, but he would raise his head, press his nose gently to her hand, just enough to remind her that silence isn't always fear. Sometimes it's the last safe place to hide. Each morning, when Maya's mother dropped her off at school, Titan would be there. Never assigned to do so, never asked, but always in the same spot, at the same time. And every time Maya turned back to wave, Titan would lift his head, ears perked just slightly, an instinct that didn't need teaching. Once during recess, Maya wrapped her arms around Titan's neck and whispered, "I think you're the only one who understands me without asking." Some teachers called it natural emotional therapy. But Deanna knew better. It wasn't therapy. It was a quiet covenant between a dog who had survived by protecting and a girl who had learned to go silent just to stay whole. Whenever Maya flinched at loud voices, Titan would move closer. When she sat at the window and said nothing, Titan would rest his head on her lap, not heavy, never abrupt, just enough for her to know, "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." That afternoon, the playground at Elmridge was bathed in a deep golden light. The maple leaves swayed gently, drifting down like even time itself was hesitating. Maya sat alone on the bench by the fence, a notebook in her arms, though she wasn't writing. Titan lay beside her. He wasn't asleep. His head rested across his front paws, eyes half-lidded, breath steady and calm. Neither of them spoke, and neither needed to. After a while, Maya leaned sideways, resting her chin on her knees. Her voice was softer than the breeze. "There was one night. I almost told Mom I saw Grandpa in a dream," she said. "But I didn't. I thought it would make her sad." Titan didn't move, just exhaled, long and slow. "Another time, I wanted to tell my teacher I don't like sitting in the middle of the class, Maya continued. Everyone's too loud there, but I didn't say that either. I was scared they'd think I'm weird. She paused, fingers twisting at the hem of her sleeve, then turned to look at Titan. Her gaze wasn't searching for an answer, more like she was looking at someone who already knew what she was about to say. But I think he already knows. From a distance, Deanna stood watching. She heard every word, each syllable like a breath slipping out from a crack that had never been touched before. And when Maya spoke again, her voice was nearly a confession whispered into the open air. I think Titan knows all the things I haven't said yet. Like, before I even feel scared, he's already up on his feet. Titan turned his head. Not suddenly. Not sharply. Just a small movement, like someone had quietly knocked at a door inside him. And he recognized the sound. Deanna stepped forward and sat beside them. You said something very true, Maya, she said. You don't have to say much to be heard, and Titan doesn't need words to know what you need. Maya looked at Titan, then nodded, a small gesture, but deep. Because there are children who cannot explain their fears out loud, and there are beings in this world who know how to carry those fears just by the way they see you. Saturday evening, in the softly lit library of Elmridge Elementary, the school hosted a small gathering for parents whose children had experienced trauma. No podium, no microphone, just warm light spilling down onto worn wooden chairs, a few windows cracked slightly open to the night, and the quiet breathing of those who had come to listen. Naomi Summers, Maya's mother, was the last to be invited up to share. She stood at the center of the room, not as a speaker, not as a guest, but simply as a mother, one who had known silence and fear and the weight of not knowing how to reach her own child. Deanna sat near the front, with Titan at her feet. Maya rested quietly beside him, her fingers curled in the soft fur near his neck. Titan lay still, almost blending into the room itself, as if he knew this story belonged to someone else now. Naomi clasped her hands, then spoke. I used to think Maya learned fear from me, she began, but the truth is, she had it before I ever knew how to name it. Her voice was steady, slow, not trembling, but each word seemed to travel a long way, as if it had to pass through memory before it reached her lips. When my husband died, Maya was only 6. It was a car accident, sudden, no goodbyes, and the hardest thing for a child isn't death. It's when someone disappears and no one comes back. The room went still. Maya didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She simply watched her mother, her eyes calm, deep, as if listening not for the first time, but hearing something settle into place. Naomi looked down briefly, then let out a quiet, almost weightless laugh. Not from joy, but from the strength of having survived it. Maya didn't speak to anyone for 7 months. She wouldn't look strangers in the eye. She didn't trust comfort. And I, the only parent she had left, tried everything. Doctors, therapists, stories before bed, sleepless nights with my hand on her back. She lifted her gaze and glanced at Titan, just as he raised his head and gently licked the back of Maya's hand, like he knew his name had been spoken. And then one day, Titan came. He didn't talk. He didn't try. He just sat there, beside her, and didn't leave. Naomi's voice softened, barely above a whisper. Maya began to draw again. The first picture was a dog with no mouth. The third, a dog with ears that could hear. By the fifth, Titan had eyes that looked like someone who had lost something but chose to stay anyway. Deanna turned toward them. Maya now leaned gently into her mother, her hand moving slowly over Titan's fur. I don't know if it was my daughter who taught Titan how to trust, Naomi said, or if he taught her first. All I know is, since that day, Maya learned to believe again. And Titan decided not to leave. The ceremony took place on a clear Sunday morning, beneath a sky so still it felt like the city was holding its breath. Flags fluttered softly above the central square. Folding chairs formed a quiet arc in front of a simple wooden stage, backed by the national flag and the bronzed emblem of Elmridge. There were no barricades, no signs, yet the entire square felt as solemn as a chapel, because people had gathered not just to honor, but to witness, something beyond naming. Deanna stood in plain clothes, just off to the side of the platform. Titan sat at her heel, his collar freshly brushed, the silver glint catching slants of morning sun. He didn't know what it meant to be honored. He didn't understand why so many eyes were fixed on him. But he knew. Today was different. Maya wore a simple white dress, her hands clasping a small envelope. When invited to step up, she didn't speak right away. She turned toward Titan, bent slightly, and whispered something that no one else could hear. Titan's ears twitched. Then he leaned forward and gently licked her hand, as if he understood, as if he had already said yes. The city's mayor took the microphone, delivering formal words that echoed through the square. He recounted Titan's name in the report of the attempted abduction, spoke of how this dog helped crack a criminal network, how he became a quiet guardian for the children who had forgotten how to trust. But as he reached the end of the speech, he paused. His voice dropped just slightly. Today, we stand before a warrior. He carried no weapon, wore no armor, spoke no words, and yet he saved lives by simply being there. Applause followed, not a thunderous, coordinated burst, but a ripple, soft and scattered from every corner of the square, like nods exchanged between those who had tasted loss and knew the value of presence. Deanna knelt and fastened a medal to Titan's collar. It bore the city's crest, shaped like a heart etched with a single word: Guardian. Titan didn't move. He turned his head slowly toward the crowd, then sat, lifted his chin. Silent. He didn't bark, he didn't wag his tail, because he didn't need recognition. He only needed to be heard. And on that morning, the city fell quiet, just once, to listen, to the silence of a dog who had already done his part. Monday morning brought with it a pale blue envelope, sitting quietly on the edge of Deanna's desk at the Federal Coordination Office. There was no sender written on the front, only an international postmark from the Czech Republic and a line of tiny, careful handwriting. To Officer Deanna and Titan. She turned the envelope in her hands, slower than usual. Titan stood beside her, head tilted, as if he too was waiting to see what memory lay tucked inside that piece of paper. Inside was a drawing, done in soft wax crayons, the paper slightly wrinkled, but it held the clarity of a memory that hadn't faded. A German shepherd stood in front of a crumbling brick doorway, light pouring in behind him like a golden halo. In front of him, a little girl curled on the ground, her eyes open, wide, clear, as if she had just awakened from a very long dream. At the bottom of the page, in wobbly English letters, was a message written in the small, determined hand of a child. I am alive because you didn't leave. Elena. Deanna didn't read it aloud. She simply placed the drawing on the table, turning it so Titan could see. He sat silently, then leaned forward to sniff it. Once. No bark, no sound, just a blink. Slow, deliberate, as if something had quietly settled back into place. Some connections defy logic. Some bonds live beyond reports or protocols. Only two souls who have stood side by side on the edge of survival can understand what it means to be kept, not by strength, but by presence. Elena, the little girl once trapped behind concrete and silence, was now living in a recovery center just outside Prague. She didn't speak much, but every week she drew a picture, and this week her picture had crossed an ocean to find the one who didn't leave when the world turned its back. Deanna folded the letter carefully, tucked it inside the inner pocket of her coat, and turned to Titan. "We weren't wrong to stay," she whispered. Titan rested his head on her knee and let out a long breath, the kind only a dog can give after going far enough to know. Sometimes life is saved not by miracles, but by someone who simply refused to walk away. The 7th floor auditorium at FBI headquarters in Quantico was usually reserved for high-level interagency briefings, a place where intelligence charts, tactical reports, and coordination strategies were projected across 3 LED screens simultaneously. But that morning, there were no slides, no statistics. Only a single sheet of A4 paper rested on the center of the podium, and behind it, hanging from a simple red string, was a child's drawing in a rough wooden frame. Standing at the podium was Special Agent Helen Shaw. Her uniform was immaculate, her expression, as always, composed, but her voice carried a faint tremor, the kind not often heard in these walls. "Today I'm not here to present an achievement report," she began. "I'm here to share a letter from a 6-year-old girl named Elena, a survivor from a place no one expected anyone to survive. She didn't write to me. She didn't write to an agency. She wrote to someone she met in the dark." She paused. One hand gently unfolded the letter. The other rested on the edge of the podium, beside a worn K9 collar that had been placed there before the briefing, like a quiet monument. Her voice was steady but soft. "I am alive because you didn't leave." The auditorium fell silent. More than 200 agents, representatives from the Department of Homeland Security, CIA, State Police, all sat still. Not because they didn't understand, but because they did. Deeply. This was why they chose this job. Shaw lowered the letter. Then, barely above a whisper, not for the microphones, but perhaps just for memory, she added, "Among all the data, the algorithms, the call signs, and codes, there are still things that can't be decrypted. A child who knows fear, and a dog who knows when not to move." There was no applause afterward, no fanfare, just a quiet, unified act. Everyone stood. No signal was given. No protocol followed. It was less a standing ovation and more a form of reverence. But it wasn't to mourn a loss. It was to honor a life, preserved by the courage of a being who needed no title, and a silence that knew exactly where and when to stay. In the front row, Deanna bowed her head. Titan lay beside her, his head resting gently across her forearm, eyes open. He didn't care who they were honoring. He only knew one thing: where Elena's eyes still looked for light, there was still something worth guarding. After nearly a year of non-stop investigation, 312 hours of digital surveillance, 11 coordinated operations, and 5 transcontinental pursuits, September 9th was officially marked within the FBI internal system as a historical milestone. Operation Pavilion, case closed. Victor Hayes, known by many names, the architect, the final nod, and, across several darknet forums, simply V, was no longer just a shadow embedded in the system. He was apprehended at a secluded villa on the Montenegrin coast, living under a false identity with a French passport and a freshly fabricated medical history. But what confirmed his identity to the joint FBI, Interpol task force wasn't DNA or fingerprints. It was the file still open on his laptop, the folder labeled Batch 32A, with Maya's name at the top of the list. The arrest of Victor Hayes triggered a cascade of follow-up takedowns within 48 hours. In Lyon, France, a middleman coordinator was arrested with 3 unused child passports. In Manila, Philippines, a technology engineer was caught operating an encrypted darknet server handling logistics data for human transfers. In Rio de Janeiro, 2 former social workers were indicted for leaking sensitive data from international orphanages. The entire network, which had operated like a ruthless logistics company with a systematic chain of assessment, acquisition, transit, delivery, was dismantled piece by piece. As of the latest report, no further access attempts had been detected from the original infrastructure. But there was one thing not included in the final report, something that didn't show up in case files. In the internal bulletin marking the closure of the operation, Helen Shaw wrote a single line. Lowercase, no highlights, no underline. The system collapsed, not because of technology, but because of one growl on a schoolyard, a sound that threw a perfect model off course forever. Tactics would be remembered, arrest details would be retold. But what the agents carried with them the most wasn't the day the international warrant was issued. It was the day Titan stood between Maya and a predator. And from that moment on, nothing went according to plan for the hunter ever again. The house sat at the end of a tree-lined street on the outskirts of Elm Ridge. No high fences, no alarm systems, just a small wooden porch, a few pots of green plants, and a little sign hanging under the awning. We live with a hero, but the hero doesn't wear shoes. Titan lay stretched out in front of the door, no leash, no handler. He was officially retired now, not with a ceremony, not with a farewell party. Just an ordinary afternoon, like any other, when Deanna quietly unbuckled the mission collar from his neck and replaced it with a leather one engraved simply, Titan, Guardian, always. Maya had grown braver. She no longer flinched when strangers approached. But every time someone new stepped into the house, the first thing she did was look toward Titan. If he lifted his head and gave a slow wag of the tail, Maya would smile. If he didn't respond, she would step back. Because to Maya, Titan wasn't just a dog. He was a compass, the emotional North Star, for things that couldn't be measured in words. Sometimes Deanna sat on the porch steps, a cup of cold coffee in her hand, watching Titan lying beside Maya on the rug. A little girl sketching. An old dog sleeping. Not a single sound. And yet, it was the most complete piece of music she had ever heard. And perhaps what Titan deserved more than any medal after everything was this. A home. A little girl who was no longer afraid. And a woman who no longer had to walk the world alone, carrying the weight all by herself. Each night before bed, Maya would rest her hand gently on Titan's collar and whisper, "You don't have to guard the door anymore. Just stay." And Titan, who never replied, would nod. Somehow the girl always knew he'd heard. The story began with a short headline printed on the front page of a local newspaper. Service dog stops kidnapping attempt at Elm Ridge school gate. But within just 6 months, the name Titan had made its way into education summits in Geneva, school safety forums in Tokyo, and even appeared in a special UNESCO advisory on redefining campus security. In Copenhagen, a non-profit organization called Guardian Step was established, inspired not by old models of protection, but by something entirely new. Behavioral sensing school dogs. These dogs were not trained to attack, not drilled on rigid commands. They were taught to listen for the things no one says, to read signs no one names, and to intervene, not through force, but through presence. Just like Titan did. Sit. Wait. Lift your head. Step forward when it matters. The first trial took place across 3 elementary schools in Finland and New Zealand. The results weren't measured in the number of violent incidents stopped, but in something quieter, deeper, the emotional climate. A decrease in reported childhood anxiety. A rise in emotional responsiveness, especially among children with a history of trauma. Psychologists called it biological mirroring. But when Maya, now older, steadier, was asked what made Titan so special, her answer was simple. Because he didn't speak, I didn't feel pressure to say the right thing. Guardian Step expanded to 11 countries. Their dogs weren't trained at military bases, but at healing centers. They didn't follow commands. They responded to relationships. At the organization's main office in Rotterdam, inside the first photo gallery room, hangs a framed drawing, crumpled paper, waxy color strokes. Titan in a red cape. Eyes bright, standing between two children, and beneath the frame, a single line. Not all heroes wear helmets. Some just know where to stand. No one expected that a crayon drawing by a little girl named Maya would one day appear on the covers of thousands of children's education books across the United States, then in Canada, Sweden, and even South Korea. In the picture, Titan isn't wearing a helmet. He doesn't have a muzzle. He simply stands in the middle of a schoolyard, a soft red cape floating behind him, his eyes tilted downward toward a small girl reaching up to touch his knee. The title of the book is If You Feel Something Isn't Right, with the subtitle, Remember Titan and Trust Your Own Senses. The author is a team of child psychologists, led by Dr. Elise Monroe, who had once served as a language coordinator for survivors during the Pavilion operation. When asked why they chose Titan as the face of the book, she only smiled. Because Titan didn't speak, so children never felt forced. They could sense him, not through words, but through truth. And the instincts of a child are often right if we allow them permission to listen. The book doesn't teach kids how to fight back. It doesn't urge them to scream loudly when scared. Instead, it gently opens with illustrated pages. A child standing alone on the playground, hearing someone call their name without knowing why. A van parked behind the bushes near school. A German shepherd standing off to the side, ears alert, not moving forward, but never leaving. Each short story ends with a quiet reminder. If you're not sure, don't go. If it feels strange, step back. If your heart beats a little faster, that's not a mistake. The final page is a real photograph. Titan lying beneath the front steps of Elmridge School, eyes closed, his head resting on Maya's legs. No headline, no caption, just one sentence in italics. He didn't teach me to be afraid. He just showed me that some silences exist to protect. Autumn had returned to Elmridge. Yellow maple leaves drifted down around the library steps, the place where Titan still liked to rest each afternoon. He no longer wore a mission-tagged collar, no longer needed a handler by regulation. He simply belonged. A group of third graders followed their teacher to the far end of the schoolyard, where a small bronze plaque had just been unveiled, mounted on a granite stone. There was no biography on it, no dates, only one simple line. Sometimes the right thing doesn't follow protocol. It only needs the right time, the right person, and the right instinct. Maya, now in 4th grade, was the first to be invited to speak. But she didn't read the note she had prepared. She just looked over at Titan, lying beneath the maple tree, then lifted her gaze and spoke softly, her voice steady and small. I don't remember every lesson from class, but I remember how I felt when he stood up without anyone telling him to. I remember that first growl no one understood, but it made everyone stop and look. And I think we shouldn't forget that feeling, because maybe that's how we survive, not by theory, but by instinct. No one clapped. No one needed to. Standing in the back, Deanna watched Titan, older now, his eyes cloudier, but his ears still perked each time someone said the word Maya. In her final report to the Department of Education and National School Safety, Shaw had written, "We have taught children how to read, how to write. It's time we teach them how to trust what they feel." Autumn returned to Elmridge. yellow maple leaves scattered across the library steps, the place where Titan still rested each afternoon. He no longer wore a mission-tagged collar. There were no handlers, no procedures. He simply belonged here. A group of third graders, led by their teacher, gathered near the schoolyard's far corner, where a small bronze plaque had just been installed on a block of granite. There was no biography engraved, no dates, just a single line. Sometimes, the right thing doesn't follow protocol. It just needs the right moment, the right person, and the right instinct. Maya, now in 4th grade, was invited to say a few words, but she didn't read the paper she had prepared. She simply looked at Titan, resting beneath the tree, then lifted her eyes and spoke in a quiet, even voice. "I don't remember every lesson from school, but I remember how I felt when he stood up without anyone telling him to. I remember that first growl no one understood, but it made everyone stop and look. And I think we shouldn't forget that feeling, because maybe that's how we survive. Not with theory, but with instinct." No one clapped. There was no need. In the back, Deanna stood watching Titan. Older now, his eyes clouded with age, but his ears still perked every time someone said the word Maya. In her final report to the Department of Education and National School Safety, Helen Shaw wrote, "We've taught children how to read, how to write. It's time. We teach them how to trust what they feel." Titan grew old. Not suddenly, but slowly, like autumn fading into winter before anyone notices. His steps became more deliberate. His shoulders carried the weight of years spent chasing truths on quiet streets. His ears drooped each morning, but when someone said, "Maya," they still flicked, just a little. Slow, but never absent. He no longer chased Maya's bike, no longer waited outside the school gate. But every night, after the light in Maya's room dimmed, Titan, by some instinct he had never unlearned, would rise from the living room rug, walk the short hallway, and lie down in front of her door. No command, no reminder, just every night. Always there. The house had changed hands, in a way. Deanna no longer wore a uniform in the morning, now working as a school safety consultant. Maya was taller than her old desk, her voice more certain, but she still folded her blanket with care, and before sleep, glanced at the narrow shadow under her door where Titan usually rested. Sometimes Maya would crack the door open, just a bit, just enough to see. And Titan, though his eyes were no longer clear, always lifted his head at the right moment. His gaze had dulled with age, but the way he looked at her was still the same as that first day, when Maya clung to the schoolyard fence and whispered, "My grandpa doesn't smell like that." And Titan had risen. Now he no longer growled, but his breath, long, steady, deep, remained the safest lullaby Maya had ever known. No matter what the world might say about self-defense techniques, recovery data, or behavioral adjustment programs, Maya, at any age, believed only one thing. If Titan is still lying there, then the world hasn't turned off the sound of trust. The band was made from an old leash, dark, worn leather, once the front end of Titan's lead. One side was frayed, the length cut short, folded in half by Maya's own hands, and wrapped with a single red thread at the seam like a quiet knot. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't polished. But anyone who saw it would know. It wasn't decoration. It was a signal. Maya kept it beside her pillow. Not on her wrist, not hung on the wall. Just there. Right on the side where Titan used to lie when she was still afraid to sleep alone. One night, her mother walked in and found Maya adjusting the band's position. She asked, "Why do you place that here every night?" Maya didn't look up. She just answered softly, "I keep it here, so if anyone comes near, Titan will know first." Naomi paused. Not out of surprise. But because she understood, her daughter had grown up with a different definition of safety. Not locks, not porch lights, but the quiet belief that someone was always listening, even when no one was speaking. Each morning, Maya would check to see if the band was still in place. If it was, she'd smile, run her fingers gently over it, then tuck it back into the small drawer, like a ritual to begin the day. Once, in a class writing assignment, Maya was asked to describe an object you carry that makes you feel protected. No one was surprised when she drew the band. But what silenced the room was the caption below her drawing. "If something happens when I sleep, he won't let me be the first to feel afraid. I place the band here, so Titan hears it first, and chooses to stand." Not everyone understood. But Titan, lying quietly at the classroom door, granted special permission during literature hour, lifted his head, let out a soft, low sound in his throat. No one prompted him, but Maya smiled, because she knew. He'd heard. The summer sun bathed Elmridge's schoolyard in gold. Rows of plastic chairs stretched in neat lines beneath strings of paper lanterns and soft glowing lights. At the front, a wooden platform stood beneath a long cloth banner that read, "Graduation Ceremony, Class of Listening to Yourself." Unlike past years, the school didn't ask the top student to deliver the closing speech. Instead, they voted for the person who had made the deepest impact on the class. The result was no surprise. Maya Summers. She stepped onto the stage slowly, dressed in a simple white dress, holding a folded sheet of paper. But when she reached the microphone, she paused, drew in a steady breath, then folded the page again and placed it beside her. She didn't look at the crowd. She didn't look at the faculty. She looked down, just off the side of the stage, where Titan, now older and slower, still lay beside the platform, his eyes half closed, as if simply hearing Maya speak was all that mattered. "The first day I came to this school, I didn't say much," she began, voice soft but clear. "I didn't tell anyone I was scared. I didn't share that some nights. I slept with my hand on the door handle, and the lights on." Some students lowered their heads. A few teachers placed a hand over their chest, not in pity, but in understanding. But there was someone who never asked. He just sat, looked, stayed silent, and knew when I needed someone to stand in my place. Maya's eyes drifted to Titan. He never said a word all these years, but because of him, I've learned something no textbook ever taught me, that some heroes never speak. They just know how to listen. Deeply. She paused, then smiled. And sometimes, if you listen long enough and sincerely enough, you'll hear the things others don't yet know how to say. Applause followed. Not loud, not all at once, but like hands meeting gently, person by person. Just enough sound for Titan to lift his head. And no, it was okay to close his eyes now, because he wouldn't miss a roar that needed answering anymore. The ceremony ended as sunlight slipped behind the far edge of the yard. The shadows of the maple trees stretched long across the empty chairs, where Titan now lay still, eyes closed, ears gently tilted. An instinct that remained, even when the world around him had softened. Maya stepped down from the stage. No one called her name. No one guided her. But Titan opened his eyes the moment she passed. Slowly, he raised his head and placed his muzzle softly into the hand of the girl who once trembled in silence. No one knew if that would be the last ceremony Titan would ever attend. But everyone, principal, teachers, even the youngest students, felt something unspoken yet unmistakable. Even if Titan no longer stood in the schoolyard, no longer padded quietly down the halls, he was still there. In the senses of children who had never truly been heard, but still held on to the hope that someone might understand. Deanna placed Titan's old collar inside a wooden box and set it beside Maya's drawing, the one of a shepherd dog in a red cape, standing between two children. Beneath the frame, A new line had been added. Titan, the dog who heard every roar never spoken. And as night fell and the doors of the house closed, a hush lingered just outside Maya's room, where no one lay, yet somehow it was still enough for a child to sleep in peace. Titan was never just a German shepherd. He was the embodiment of something humanity often forgets: loyalty without condition, protection without reason, and the kind of listening that doesn't need to understand every word. His story was never about medals or missions. Titan showed us, especially the children, that safety doesn't always come from fences or sirens. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in a glance that chooses to stay, in a breath that holds still at the right moment. German shepherds have long been praised for their intelligence, alertness, and loyalty. But Titan became living proof of something far more profound. Animals don't need language to understand, and they don't need understanding to love. We teach our children how to read, how to write. But maybe, just maybe, we should also teach them how to notice, how to feel, and how to respect the lives that move quietly beside their own. Because in a single, silent moment, when no one else sees it coming, it might be a dog like Titan who notices first what the world has not yet seen.